Because if you only fill your brain with tons of information but never have the tools to know how to use it to change your own life, then what is the good of it? When you get back home or you get back to your day to day life, you'll just fall right back into old patterns that have kept you stuck before. Welcome to the Love Your Brain podcast, the podcast designed for everyday people who are ready to hop off the negative thought hamster wheel and enjoy a less hostile environment in their own brains. Our brains are where we live our entire lives, and I'm on a mission to help people see that they have everything they need to make it a happier place to be. So join us for this episode of the Love Your Brain podcast. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Love Your Brain podcast, or welcome if you're new. If you've been following along, you probably saw that I took last week off of podcasting. I did that for a bit of a relax and refresh week. I actually wasn't feeling well one evening, and then the next day when I would normally record, I ended up feeling like my body was really telling me to just put the brakes on. So I quite literally put the brakes on everything, which basically turned into a whole weekend completely off from life. And for me, I'm usually a person who's very go, go, go. I don't sit and be still very often. Funny enough, the only time I'm really sitting super still, it appears I'm doing nothing, is when I'm usually doing meditation. And really, even then, I'm doing something. So, needless to say, apparently my body decided it was just time for a break. So, I took the week off from putting out a podcast. But hopefully, you took time to get caught up on any missed episodes, and I'm back with you here this week. This time, though, that I took off from the podcast really gave me good inspiration for what I'm going to talk about this week. And it's a great segue into some really exciting updates for our podcast listening community, but more on that later. Now, most podcasters or creators in general that are in the self help field aren't going to tell you what I'm going to tell you today because it could negatively impact how their podcast or their content performs. But this is something I'm not afraid to tell you because it's actually the whole point of the work that we're doing. And that is that instead of more information, you might actually need integration. Sometimes it's actually better to not consume new information. Even this podcast, sometimes it's better to not listen to another new episode. Instead, it might be better to take some time to fold in some of the things you've learned into your day to day life instead of just taking in new information. And the reason I say this is because sometimes we get stuck in a cycle of feeling like we need to consume, consume, consume. We get in the habit of just taking in new information all the time. And the problem is that when it comes to learning, especially when it comes to learning about how to help ourselves, we don't always, in fact, need more information, but what we need is actually integration. And what I mean by integration in this context is when you take the information that you've learned and you start actually applying it to yourself. You start integrating what you've learned and moving it from just something that you know to something that you actually live. Those things, those habits, those practices need to start getting woven into the landscape of your life in order for them to have the impact that they're supposed to have. Without this, without integration, why do we even learn? If we aren't going to apply it and let it change us, why do we consume it? Now, integration can really be the hardest part because it takes work. And sometimes it takes sitting with some parts of ourselves that we've ignored because maybe they make us uncomfortable or they're parts of ourselves that we don't really like. Integration requires taking what you've learned and seeing how it relates to you. Sometimes it takes questioning long held beliefs or behaviors that we've had, seeing if they still align with the new information that we have. Sometimes integration looks like examining how you believe you should show up in the world, how you should treat people, but maybe then realizing in this one area or maybe this one person, you've always told yourself, oh, well, it doesn't apply to them. And instead, really sitting down with that hard truth and figuring out if that's something you need to work on. Other times, integration means taking practices or daily habits that you've always heard were a great idea and actually implementing them. Sometimes we can think certain habits or practices are great in theory, but in fact, just thinking that they're great won't actually do a darn thing. It won't do anything for us if we don't actually do them. Another way to think about this is comparing it to the consumption of food. The whole idea of consuming food is to give us energy to do stuff, right? It's the fuel so that we can have what we need to go live life, challenge our bodies, move around, play with our kids, take our dog for a walk, or learn a new sport. That is the reason why we're eating. But sometimes we get really comfortable with those tiny dopamine hits that happen when we just consume food. But we don't actually end up using that energy. We just consume, consume, consume until we're overweight and just sitting around like a bump on a log. I like to imagine the food in our bodies or the calories we consume are saying to us, like, hey, did you forget what I'm for? I'm here to help you live life. Get up and move. And the same goes for information. Sometimes we get addicted to the small dopamine hits that we get from just learning new information and having those aha moments or those moments of breakthrough where we understand something new. But then we don't use that information for what it's intended for. The information is, in fact, to help you make meaningful change in your life. The information is meant to help you move forward to something new, to do something new, change something up so that you actually start to live differently, think differently, and feel differently. That's the whole point. And just like our overconsuming food causes issues for us in terms of weight gain, overconsumption of information has actually shown to eventually cause anxiety and overwhelm because our brains actually get overrun with information and they just don't know how to use it. It's too much to process. And that feeling of, well, what should I do with it becomes so overwhelming that you don't even know where to start. Now, I want to share an example of one of the best integration experiences I've ever had. Now, it wasn't related to self help or mental health or therapy or anything like that. It was actually for a study abroad program. And this may be a far reach, but I think some of the tools that I learned there are really helpful for what we're talking about when it comes to integrating information. Now, I participated in the study abroad program in college where we lived in Spain for about 6 months. And near the end of that program, they set up something like this reintegration preparation. But basically, what it was we had the staff person guide us through what it would be like when we went home after the program. They explained that we had grown and changed so much while living abroad that it would feel strange to go back to old places where we've been, but feel differently, especially with everything that we had experienced. They explained that it wouldn't likely feel the same anymore because we were actually different now. They provided this really good analogy of how we're like a plant that was moved from a small pot to a larger pot, and we got comfortable in that larger pot. We expanded into that larger pot. We grew and changed while living in this larger pot. And then we're going back home. It would feel like we're going back into a small pot again. It would feel strange and like we don't fit in some ways. And this helped me so much. Even just having the time set aside to think about how I personally wanted to handle the transition, and then having someone available to help us process through it all was invaluable for my journey. Because really, I did feel like I was a larger plant trying to fit back into a smaller pot when I got back home. And I saw how important it was to have the time prior to figure out what parts of who I'd become in that isolated experience overseas did I want to keep and continue to foster in myself, and what parts was I going to just let fall away because they didn't provide as much value. But it was really important for me to be able to take this time to look at who I'd become, what I had learned, and what I really did want to carry with me as I went back home to the States. For me, in that time in Spain, I'd been doing a lot of siestas. You've probably heard about that before. In Spain, that's a big deal. That was a big part of our day to day life. We took siestas every day. And now I didn't think I wanted to continue taking siestas when I was home in the States. And honestly, that would be kind of a big hassle because our lifestyles are so different. But there were certain things that I did during siesta time that I knew I wanted to make space for in my new life. One of those things was just taking time to do nothing and just be. So sometimes during siestas, I would actually go to a park and just people watch, just sit and take in the moment. And I really wanted to incorporate more time of that when I got home than anything else. That was really important for me. I wanted to stop rushing all the time and just take time to be. So, having the opportunity to think through some of those things before we actually made the trek home was super helpful. It really was important for me to look at how I wanted to honor how I had grown during my time in Spain and really be mindful of what parts of me I wanted to keep intact during the transition back to the States. Because if I hadn't put that preparation and plan into place, I could very easily just feel uncomfortable when I get home. And then instead of navigating it wisely, I could have just caved and decided, well, I'll just go back to who I was before and how I acted before I went to Spain and just lose out on all of the gains that I had, all of the things that I had learned and the ways that I had grown, and just fall back into old patterns. I mean, we've all had those times before where we revisit an old place and feel like, wow, I really don't feel like I fit here anymore. And then you try to see if you need to maybe just cave and go back to that old person, or are you going to honor who you are now and see how that person can be present in this new space? And I'm so grateful my school had the foresight to know that this was something we really would need and we'd need help with in order to transition well back into the States. And so much of this applies to the integration process when it comes to learning about self help, mental health, or how our brains operate in general. Now, obviously, we're not moving across the world, but whenever you take in new information, it does change you. It changes how you interact with the world because you start to see things differently. And it's important just the same to take time to figure out what parts of what you've learned do you want to make a part of who you are. What is of enough value that it's worth integrating into your day to day life? And what will that look like? And what things maybe just right now maybe feel like they don't align and not worth it for you to carry forward. Or maybe there's pieces of information you've learned that you think are super important, but you don't necessarily need them, but maybe it's something that you know you're going to be able to help someone else with down the road, and you're just going to keep it in your toolbox. Those things are important too, because if you only fill your brain with tons of information but never have the tools to know how to use it to change your own life, then what is the good of it? When you get back home or you get back to your day to day life, you'll just fall right back into old patterns that have kept you stuck before. And if I ever let this space become a place where people just come to fill up their brains and go back to life as normal, I would be doing a huge disservice. You deserve better. You deserve to not only know how the brain works, but also how you can rewire your own brain, how you can actually make it work the way you need to in order to experience your day to day life in a fulfilling way. So last week, as I was taking my own break, I was just reminded of how I wanted to remind you as well to take breaks from time to time, even if it means taking a break from this content on this podcast. I don't think most podcasters would probably say that, but I truly would be doing you a disservice not to say that, to not remind you that you need to take time to make sure you're applying what you're learning to your actual life from time to time. This is the whole point. This podcast isn't just here to help you fill your brain. It's instead here to arm you with the tools you need to show up differently in your day to day life, to transform how your brain works so you can enjoy your life and your world more. Which leads me to a very exciting update I also wanted to share with you today, and that is we finally have our new online community platform up and running. The Love Your Brain podcast online community is now live. And I'm so excited for you all to join in. If you remember, I had talked previously about creating an online community where we could all connect more and I could share more tools and information to go alongside what's happening on the podcast. And it's finally here. I think a huge part of integrating what we're learning on the podcast is having a place to process with others who are also integrating the same things, the same information, and also to have access to more tools that will help us all to really start to live differently, make more tweaks to our daily habits or our goals, and just help us to move forward, not just be stuck in a cycle of consuming information. I'm really thinking that in the next year of this podcast, I may actually pivot from pushing out such frequent podcast episodes and instead start investing more time and resources to helping our community integrate the information. And although that full vision for the next year is still in the works, I would definitely encourage you to jump in now, join us so that you don't miss out on any of that. It's free right now to join, so just click the link in the show notes, set up your profile, and just jump in on the discussion. I'm really looking forward to all the new ways that we can interact with one another, really be inspired by each other's journeys. I know so many of you personally, but you don't necessarily get to hear all the cool stories from one another. And that's something so valuable I think this platform will bring. I really hope this new edition of this online community adds something to your journey where you feel you can really start to make meaningful change, or just have some of the supports that you need as you're working through your own stuff on your own journey, and we can all work through that together. Now, next week, we are going to talk about a really cool benefit to this online community and a way we can actually subconsciously change how our brains are working just by interacting with each other. So make sure to tune in for that. It's going to be a fun one. All right. Have a great week, guys. I hope you found something helpful here today on the Love Your Brain podcast. Maybe a laugh or a feeling of validation, or maybe just a few moments to have company while you do your laundry. Whatever you take from it, I hope you enjoyed your time and leave feeling empowered to be more you every day. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on the next episode, and leave a review. I'd love to hear what you think. Have a great one.